Champions of Psychology is meant as education and entertainment. It is not a substitute for medical advice or professional counseling. Discussion of mental health topics will be primarily rooted in research and the personal experiences and self-disclosures of the hosts. While we can provide generalized education and possible mental health resources, we cannot offer any recommendations, advice, or opinions for any specific persons, cases, or situations. We provide these resources and links at our sole discretion, but have not necessarily vetted or reviewed any resource. We assume no liability for the use of the information or resources on these sites, and we encourage you to use your own best judgment.
Hello, and welcome to Champions of Psychology, a show with the goal of openly talking about mental health and gaming presented by Codename Entertainment. I'm one of your hosts, Treavor Bettis, and joining me each week is an amazing person who is...
I'm Mitra Jordan. Am I an amazing person? It's so hard
We
to
have
know.
this talk every week. Yes, you do. you are an amazing person, but we're
Sets me
also
off every time.
we're also joined by another amazing person who is...
Hi, I'm Erin Evans. I'm the author of the Brimstone Angels saga and the books of the Usurper. You may also remember me from my previous stint hosting Champions of Lore with Treavor, and occasionally playing Havilar. Also, I too think Mitra is an amazing person.
Well, I think Erin's an amazing person, and I think Trevor's pretty brilliant too. So you know what? This is just we're just very pleased with each other. And
I did just realize while you're saying that, I'm like, well, now we got to have B-Dave on next season so that all three of us can be the multi-champions. We've been on both champion shows now. Yeah, Erin, thank you so much for taking time to join us today. Chat, we had a show a couple episodes ago talking about creativity. And Mitra and I thought it'd be a really cool thing to do where we had Erin on and talk about kind of like more detailed about creativity and mental health, and someone who has gone through a lot of experiences with creativity, going from getting started to being professional and everything. So there's a lot of insight that you can put into this that we'd love to hear about.
Hope so.
Yeah, because last time when we were talking about it, we were very much talking about it from how hobbies and our own creative process can be such a support in mental health. But we're also making the distinction that what's it like when the thing you love becomes your work? Like it's not, I imagine it's not always a refuge then, because there's deadlines and there's performing, and trying to kind of, so tell us a little, like what?
I definitely think that's the case, right? There's, it becomes something that's sort of hard to balance because, okay, so as a professional author, I agree to write things for people, and so they have to get done. And so, if I'm having a bad day where I just don't feel like writing, or, the kind of day where what I would like to do is kind of curl up under a blanket and feel sorry for myself, because I definitely have those days. I have to weigh that against the fact that I owe someone the product of my creativity.
Yeah.
On top of that, there will be sort of, you put a lot of yourself into these things, and then someone else is going to look at it and tell you, you need to change some of this. And that can feel weird or bad, depending on where you are in that sort of process of growth, because you, again, put a lot of yourself in here. This means a lot to you. And I think there is something to be said for finding that balance, because on the one hand, I have known a lot of authors for whom they get to a place where the writing is a task. I sit down, I do the words, and I'm done. And I don't sort of get emotionally involved in my work, so to speak, that I do it with little more remove. And that's how I get through this. But I do think too, there's a place where, you are putting yourself in this, but you also have to find the joy. You have to keep the joy, because it is a long process, and if you don't, it'll really grind you down.
Yeah. Getting through a whole book with no joy sounds devastating.
That would be very difficult.
Yeah.
Yeah, that joy is that the piece that allowed you to kind of discover or commit to writing in the first place? Like, is that,
Yes.
yeah,
Most
yeah.
definitely. I mean, so for me, I didn't really, I say I didn't really start writing until I was in high school, which is
Mm,
not that late. But since when I was very small, my mother told me, you're going to be a writer.
oh,
And I was like, no, I'm not. I'm going to do any of these other things I want to do. But I
mm,
started spending more time sort of telling story. I would draw pictures and then I would kind of make up stories that go with the pictures.
mm,
Cool, badass fantasy
Mm.
ladies. And I'm like, well, she's like a knight and she rides on a tiger, because why not? That's
yeah.
self-validating. And just finding that sort of escapism to a degree,
Mm,
the pleasure of creating something, and then also the connection of it. Because, and this is a big piece too, that I realized when I wrote things and people read them, it resonated. Like they liked it. They wanted to tell me
mhm,
they liked it. You know, there
mm,
would be something in there that spoke to him. And so here's this way of connecting with other people, which,
mm,
I was very shy as a child, which I tell people that now and they think that's funny, but I am fundamentally an introvert and sometimes I am really quite shy. But
mm,
that other way of connecting to people is actually like something I didn't realize I was responding to so strongly until later on in my sort of creative journey. But so yes, it was this place of like, it's fun. It's like the thing I do to relax. Like I
mm,
come home from school and I write my story.
mm,
I'm working on a paper, but I want to be writing this thing instead that I'm finding really fun and silly.
mm,
And it's not until it starts becoming like I start taking creative writing classes and these are assignments,
mm,
and it starts to shift. There is a thing for writing, and I think this is true in most creative fields, that I talk about sometimes, that I've heard it called sort of the critical valley, because you have sort of two poles. You have your creative faculties and then you have your critical faculties. So
mhm,
especially when we start out, it's all about, you know, that excitement, that like energy, that pouring
mm,
out your ideas, and you're just making something and it feels good. And then we start to think about, what does it mean to make something well? What does it
mm,
mean to how could I do this better? How do I make this thing look more like the stuff I admire?
mm,
And we learn a lot about what makes a good story or a good painting or a good arrangement of music. And the more we understand how something can get wrong, the more we see that sort of in our own work. And I have known a lot of people who kind of get stuck there, where we're just looking at all the things that are wrong about it and it sucks all the joy. And this is, I think, if for someone who wants to make a profession of this, you have to find a place where you understand that this is a temporary state, and you will come back here periodically. You will learn things and realize, oh, I could do better.
Hmm.
The only way out of that is to go through, to keep writing, to keep reading,
mhm,
to
mhm,
keep practicing your craft. And I think too, there's a place where you want to start to sort of separate that from yourself, because I think, when we are just sort of making things and enjoying it, we are identifying the object with the activity in a lot of ways. Like the
mm,
joy I have of writing, the part of myself I put into my writing, that's all a part of me, and so therefore the writing and I are one thing. And when we can sort of step back and look at it, we're gonna have it's a much better time. It's
Yeah.
it's a lot
Yeah.
easier to work on, to put time into, to step away from it when you need to. I'm jumping all over the
Oh,
place,
no,
I
no, no.
know,
You
but
you are,
That
but I'm
that's
picking up. Yeah,
but that
that's exactly
okay.
what we wanted.
Yeah.
Sorry.
No, it's okay.
I'm so
Yeah,
glad, because I don't know how to turn it off.
it's fine. What I picked up from that is a couple of things. We're talking about this, and so I'm going to back up a little. We usually say why we're talking about this. We wanted, I think, to help elucidate a greater understanding of the creative process and what happens when that creative process becomes monetized,
Hmm.
right?
Mhm.
And I think you point to, if one was several, but the first really important thing is that we have to protect our relationship with the creative process.
Hmm.
Yes.
because otherwise we can go down into everything sucks and I'm just not good enough, which is demoralizing.
Mhm.
Or we can, and as part of that, we can challenge ourselves to create something good when we're not there yet sometimes,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
It's like I just started to bake, but now I expect myself to be able to do a wedding cake. Completely unrealistic and also demoralizing, and misses out on the steps that skill requires we learn.
Mhm.
Mhm.
And so there's
Yeah.
a piece of this that you're addressing, I think, where we're working on learning our skills, but we're not there yet. And so it feels like most likely that we're encountering failure all the time.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And you're saying that in many ways that's a stage we'll pass through, but I think you're also speaking to the idea we challenge ourselves more, we'll be back there. Is that?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think part of it is recognizing that failure is sort of part of the process and that it's
Yeah.
not a bad thing.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Because especially and I don't want to speak for everybody's process, and I am definitely talking mostly to writing, but what I have found is that the best thing for both my writing and in a way for my like mental health and the way that I
Mm.
think about my mental health is understanding that a product's not finished until I walk away from it. A book isn't
Mm.
done until I say it's done.
Mhm.
And some of that is like the deadline and things like
Yeah.
that. But the
Yeah.
idea that you have to do it right the first time, I think, is something that is very infectious. That somehow, and I will admit it, I just published my 10th novel,
Heck yeah.
and I still have this little voice that says maybe this next one, the first draft will be perfect. And it
Mm.
doesn't happen. And so
Mm.
that idea that like you can try something and be bad at it, you can make something and look at it and go, this isn't where I want it to be, and then adjust it, make changes to it, or set it aside and work on the thing you want to work on because you realize I don't want to make a wedding
Yeah.
cake. I want to
Yeah.
make more bread. Like
Yeah.
it is okay to reach too far and fail and learn something from it, but you have to get okay with that and not, I don't even like the word failure in this case, right? Because
Yeah.
there isn't an end point. I don't ever want to get to a place where I don't feel challenged at all by the things that I'm making, because I
Mhm.
think if I don't look back and think each book is better than the last one, I feel a little like I missed an opportunity. Which is a whole other topic because probably I should be more okay with being like, this is a 7, it doesn't have to be a 10.
Yeah.
But
I literally one of the tasks my therapist gave me recently was becoming accustomed to it just okay. And I'm like, "Oh, that's the thing that is acceptable?" Oh, okay. Cool.
yeah,
But
it's
what
kind of thrilling, to be honest, when you embrace it.
Mm.
one of the things though that I want to touch on that you were talking about before though, and this ties into what Mitra was talking about and you just talked about, was the being connected to the thing and being able to kind of step away from it. And I do think that is kind of a an important step when it comes to creativity in a professional scope, because like
Hmm.
several years ago you offered to read one of my books, and
Yeah.
I was overjoyed and couldn't believe it, and I sent it to you and you were like, okay, what do you want to get out of this? And I was like, tear this thing apart. Like, I want to know what's wrong with it structurally, character wise, all this stuff. And I sent it off to you, and I was fine, and I didn't think about it. But like, 10 years before that, I had a 12-page short story that I handed to like 8 friends to read at the coffee shop we hung out at, and I was shaking. And I was like, oh God,
Yeah.
what if they hate it? What if it's terrible? And like, I was freaking out. And I handed off a book to you to read, and I was fine. And so like, I definitely think
That's
that
great.
that being able to separate yourself from the creativity, as it is still a part of you, but anything said bad about it or critiqued wise about it is not an attack on you, sort of thing. And it can definitely feel that way.
Yeah, and I don't want to dismiss the fact that like it feels bad to have someone say, I don't like this.
Oh well, yeah. I think
like,
that one down the
that
road
doesn't
is
go away,
yeah.
right? Your feelings are valid, but it is sort of like, it's not a referendum on you is the part, because I think that everybody when they start out, there is this like, if you don't like my work, do you not like me and all my future works too, right? And I think that's the most important thing. I think more than any, like, learn the story structure or learn read the canon or anything like that. It's sort of learn how to relate to your work and relate to sort of the idea of a readership, because that's the one that's going to mess you up if you don't.
Yeah, that definitely. I don't think either of you know, but my first degree was in creative writing.
Oh, awesome. I didn't know that.
I don't really talk about it all that much because I'm not a writer. Or at least if I am, I've been a writer of some academic stuff,
You're a
and
writer.
that's
Like,
about it.
You
You
are.
know what I'm saying? I
Yeah.
am not a writer in the way that you two are, and that is fine with me. I
Yeah.
am totally at peace with it. But I do certainly remember the process of crits. I remember the process of writing and having to submit things. And I certainly remember how difficult it was at first, because I think really anytime you're presenting your creative baby, and this is the piece you're talking about, how do I separate myself from my creative baby? How do I recognize it has a place that is separate from me, that it has to in some way stand on its own merits? And whether it can do that depends on how I learn, how I progress, all of that. So I think that in any venture that we do, we have to be able to look critically at our work. And particularly the more independently we're working. I sit in an office with my clients, it's just me. When I was training, I did a great deal of supervision. I did a great deal of practicum work. Obviously, this isn't writing, but I still think there's a connection there between how you are and how you allow yourself to get critiqued and how you examine how your work is coming across, whatever that is.
Yeah.
And whether you're able to step aside from it. And more so, of course, when you have a book and you don't have a connection with your reader aside from the words that they're reading.
Yeah.
And you have no power to affect or influence how they're responding to that. I'm with live people and I can see how they're responding to things.
You can pivot.
I can pivot.
Okay, obviously this character isn't working. Let's go talk about this one over.
Yeah, it's more akin in that way. It's akin to, I guess, writing live comedy or something. You go, oh, shit, this set isn't working. What do I switch to? But when you don't have an audience in that way, when your audience is somewhere else and you're submitting a work and you don't always know how it's going to go, like, how do you deal with that? In terms of your mental, not just your mental
tough,
health,
especially for traditional publishing, which is how I've done all my books. There's a long lead time between turning in a book and it being in people's hands, and especially, so my most recent books are a fantasy mystery series called The Books of the Usurper, which are published through Orbit.
Fantastic. Go on.
Thank you. That is a very long lead time. So it'll be months and months and months and months after I've done the last pass of the proofreading, agreed on the proofreading, and then it's going to go out. It's going to go. They're going to send out ARCs. They're going to put it through the print. And it gets to a point where my brain's like, nobody said anything. They don't like it. Which is really tough. Whereas my previous books, when I wrote for Wizards of the Coast, the publishing process was a lot faster because they don't have a review period. They don't send things out for reviews. They're sort of doing things in parallel because the book has to come out. So it's a little faster. And when you write books for an established fandom, they tend to all have opinions very quickly. So that is one thing that I have had to adjust to. I have to sort of set up guardrails for myself because I do want, and because this is another thing, I think I, for a while, heard don't sort of over prioritize how readers are going to respond, because every time someone picks up a book, their experience is going to be shaping how they read the book, and you can't control for the 10,000 experiences that come into your book, and you can just sort of try and shape the story the best you can, and some people aren't going to like it, and that isn't something you have any control over. And I think that is true, but I feel like to a certain extent, I was like, well, when I have successfully done this, I won't care about people reading my book. I don't need validation.
And how does it feel as you say that now?
Well, so this was the thing I told my therapist. I feel really, I have some shame about the fact that I care so much. And she's like, why? That's a very human thing. Of course we want people's good opinions. Of course we want people to love the thing we make. It would be crazy not to. Like, it would be harmful not to care at all. So I kind of try to be sensible about how I engage with it, because like Goodreads is a great place to find out what other people think about books you might want to read. However, it is a place where people just throw their feelings on a website, and I don't know why.
I will say the thing that B-Day Voice says here, whereas if you want to check out Goodreads, go to the 1-star reviews of William Shakespeare stories. They're a trip.
This is the thing I actually advise newer authors to do. Like, if you're, because I don't remember who told me to do this, but I think it's really smart, is, if you're feeling bad about people not liking the thing you made, go find the book that you love, the book that makes you just wish you could write something so wonderful, and read that one's 1-star reviews, because everybody has them. Every book has people who think, I don't understand what's wrong with the rest of you. So that's kind of the thing, is like, review sites are not really for authors. I've had people contact me and try to give me constructive criticism, and fundamentally, there's no such thing with a published book. I can't change it. Right? This is not in process anymore. So being sort of mindful about where you get that information, but having space to get it too, because when you spend so much time on a project like that, to never hear people say I liked it is weird and hard. That's a lot of time living in your own head to see no connection to the rest of the world.
It is really natural to want to not be vulnerable, right? And so when you say, my ideal was to get to this place where I didn't care, that's really what, in my opinion, you're talking about, is like, I just want to be impervious. I don't want this in my head. I don't want to have to deal with it. I don't want to have to think about it. And of course, that's also a natural desire to have, particularly when we're continually putting ourselves out there. Here's this baby. And there's this lead time where, oh God, I don't even know how it's going to go. And I'm looking at it, and maybe I see a typo or something I don't like, or a sentence I wish I'd constructed differently. And there you are, you have to kind of know how to live with that. And I'm going to say right now, so I am on your second book in the Usurper series. I'm about halfway through. Everything has gone all to hell.
What? Oh, that thing there?
So good.
Relics of Ruin that's available in bookstores right now?
2 things. First of all, I've never been able to be in the middle of a book and talk to the author. I can count that on one finger, and it's just a delight. It really is. And also, I'm so glad we met before I read your books. And that's because I'm so glad we kind of got to be friends and have coffee and all this before I read how amazing your books were, because then I didn't have to go through a tongue-tied phase in the same way. I gotta say. Because they really are lovely on so many different levels, the fully developed characters, the beautiful world. If you haven't read the first one, I'm going to tell you, it takes a bit to kind of figure out what's going on, because you get into it and you're right into it. And you have to, okay, who's that character? What are they doing? But just a little bit, couple of chapters, and then you're there. And I just fell in love with the world. I really did. And so yeah, I'm going to gush for a minute. And it's just been it's a privilege to read it. I'm really enjoying the second book. And I'm sure we're a ways from writing the third one here, or getting the third one out. And that's terrifying.
It's due at the end of July. So hopefully that all stays on track.
That's wonderful. Yeah. So I think you've spoken to some of I think the more vulnerable and painful experiences around being a writer.
Mhm.
We were both quite curious about the day-to-day experience of being a writer, being a parent, and
Yeah.
remaining and protecting your own creative processes, remaining creative and protecting those processes in order to continue being creative when life throws so many challenges at one. Would you be willing to speak to that for a minute?
Yes, very much.
Yeah.
This is one of my favorite topics, actually.
Excellent.
Parenting. So I have two kids. My eldest is 12. My youngest is 8, and also has a monogenetic disorder called STXBP1 disorder, which is it causes epilepsy and kind of a global developmental delay. So he takes a lot of care. He's adorable and hilarious, and I love him very much. I'll brag about him for ages, but I'll brag about both of them for ages, but I'm not going to do that right now. So when my first son was born, I had just been tapped to write my first hardcover for Wizards of the Coast, The Adversary. So I did a story summit like a week after I gave birth, which I don't think I would advise my younger self to do that, but I was really like, I'm not gonna miss this. This is a huge deal. So it was very tough to get used to, but it's one of those things where I had to sort of decide what do I want and what do I need, and how do I what do I let go of to make sure I have those things. And I'm very fortunate that I have close family who have kind of chipped in with childcare. That makes a big difference. And now both of them are in school, so I can work while they're in school and not in the house. But it does mean things like, when I was my peak creative time has always been like 3 to 7. Like that's when I really hit my stride. This is not a thing that's possible for school age kids. Like that's from when they get home from school to when they have to like finish their dinner. So I've just had to adapt and build up other times that I can to kind of like pull away from that space and make more make the creativity come to me. Basically, nothing will disabuse you of the notion of a muse that is in charge of things faster than the reality of trying to write while also having anything that's gonna kind of chop up your schedule. But one thing, what I would do, and with after my youngest was born, I had kind of another round of, oh my God, how do I do this? And what I did was basically build up this sort of ritual. So I would have a playlist I listened to. I would drink a particular tea. I would use the scented hand lotion. And I would sort of just build up all these cues that said, this is writing time now. Because that also coincided, like I finished my last book for Wizards of the Coast when he was just a couple months old. I remember working on that draft while he was in the hospital, and they were trying to figure out why he was having seizures, because it was if I didn't do it, the book would get canceled. So everybody appreciate The Devil You Know, because I about put everything in it. But so after that, there's this other piece, which is that when you're not writing on contract, you have to finish the book and then sell it. So at that point, like I wanted my career to grow and keep going, and I wanted to write new things, but there's no deadline pressure. There's no, you have to finish the draft in the hospital room or the book doesn't happen. It's just you are the one driving. So I realized that it would be very easy to let it slide and let it slide. And so I made those cues to say, this is writing time now. And so that when I did those things, I could shift into it.
So if you hang on for a second, I just want to address,
Yeah.
that's a fantastic idea. So from a therapeutic perspective, just those cues for whatever it is you're trying to focus on, to have an intentional set of cues that tell you this is writing time is really helpful, or working time, or studying time, or whatever it is, to be able to set cues like that say that basically tell your body that you are now doing this thing. So yeah, that's
Yeah.
fantastic. And I also see how motherhood and writing was sort of inextricably linked for you. But what you're also addressing is there's this very different when you have a contract to write certain things and deadlines that add a structure, whether you want it or not, they add a structure and a kind of concrete commitment, which I think also helps with the discipline over the let's just wait for the muse to show up, as you say. But so more about how was it going from that to then, yeah, not having that? That
Yeah,
sounds,
it again, I had to be really there's two parts of that. Being disciplined and saying you want to do this. Even when you can't see the end, when because a novel is a marathon. It takes a long time. It's hard to kind of see that there's going to be an end result when you're just starting out. On our podcast, Writing About Dragons, the Chit will sometimes talk about writing like swimming between two islands.
yeah.
And once you get into the water, like once you get a certain distance, like your feet aren't touching, you can't see where you're going. It's terrifying. And you have to really build up that space. And then the other part is kind of defending that time, because it is, when you're not on a contract, it's the easiest thing to let it slip. And the reality is there's just a lot of things. As an adult, there's a lot of things you've got to do. And then as a parent, there are a lot of things that get added on top of that. And so sometimes it's the case where it's like, okay, this is the thing that's easiest to drop so that I can make sure that the groceries are bought and the diapers are changed and the kid gets to the pediatrician and all of these things. But at the same time, like it's important and it needs to get added back in. And this is something that I'm really, I'm glad I have a partner for whom making sure I have that time is a priority. Because I would be miserable if I did not have this space, setting aside the fact that this is my career and I don't want to drop it. I also love doing it, and I don't think I know how to do anything else. So the so making sure that time gets carved out. And then another piece of that is there's just a reality when you have kids that they're so great. They're so great. They're so great and fun to be around. And when you say, I'm not going to be around you for a bit, it sometimes I sometimes feel really guilty. But the thing I always remind myself is that like I do spend a lot of time with my kids, and I'm taking my eldest to Gen Con this year. And I've had friends be like, you're taking your kid to Gen Con? I'm like, I'm so excited. We're gonna have so much fun together. Like I genuinely like being around him. But at the same time, there are times and spaces where I'm like, you don't bother me right now. I'm working on this. And part of that is, I don't ever want to give my kids the idea that they need to like give all of their time and space to someone else because, right? Your kids are important. They are a very big priority, but you don't have to be the like constant entertainment machine. It's good for them to see you doing other things and being a whole happy person.
100%. And it's good for you as well to have that time that in some ways replenishes and also gives you something different, because then you can come back to the time you have with them and give your heart to it. If you're always available and there aren't healthy boundaries, it's really hard to do that as a parent. So, and our eldest was 12 when we first took him to Gen Con, and I have to say it was great. And it's the best time.
I was 12 the first time I went to Comic-Con. That's just like a good age for it.
There you are. It is.
loving
It
this.
is.
I'm
I think
loving hearing this.
you still want to be around your parent.
Yeah.
And at the same time, you have a certain amount of independence. If you have a phone, you can wander around a little bit by yourself too and discover things for yourself. You can also lead your parent around and show them things you've discovered. It's a good age.
Yeah.
It's a fun age. Yeah.
One of the things that I wanted to turn the conversation to, because one of the reasons you popped into my head for this episode, not just because you have so much experience with this, but also because you took something that you deal with mental health and put into your writing. And I think
Yeah.
and while that's not something that I think everyone does with their creativity, of like taking something that they struggle with and putting it into it, there is a good group of people that do. And you did that with your magic system in the books of Usurper. Can you talk a bit about coming up with that and implementing
Yeah.
that?
Yes, this is one of my favorite things in these books that I don't get to talk about enough because it's sort of like kind of a deep level thing. One of the inspirations was literally I was sitting in my therapist's parking lot, right? You know, when I was early let me wind this back. So I have a generalized anxiety disorder with panic, and comorbid depression, because, you know, why just have one? And
Totally.
and yeah, I've been seeing a therapist for quite a long time now. And I'm struggling to remember how long. She knew me before I was pregnant, so over 12
Oh, wow.
years. And this was, you know, when I first had the inklings of this, I was still early in the process of kind of working through this diagnosis and still having fairly regular panic attacks. And what I remember thinking is after like a really intense therapy session, going, I want to write a magic system that feels like an anxiety disorder.
Mm.
And so in the books of the Usurper, the kind of main magic system is what I call the affinity magic. So people will develop a connection to a worked material. So something that has been sort of shaped or crafted or built in some fashion. And so then they can sort of interact with it. So one of the characters in both books, Eni, is an ink specialist. So she can just sort of touch ink and she knows what it's made of. She knows how old it is. She can sometimes tell things about the person that wrote with it. Like she has this deep connection to it. But it's a magic that sort of waxes and wanes. And when it hits its strongest point, there's a blurring of the line between you and the affinity material. And they call that the spiral. And so once a specialist kind of tips over in the spiral, they start to kind of pull all of that material into them, and they can sometimes start creating it, and it can be very dangerous. Eni starts making ink, for example, and you make ink by first making char. So burning things is not great. But in that sense, like the thing that I was really especially trying to grab onto is there's this feeling when I was hitting kind of an anxiety attack that it was like almost an inevitability. Like you're falling down a slope and you just gotta fall. And once you're falling, that's the only thing that makes sense. You just keep falling. And so that's that feeling of something that wants to kind of pull you back in. But then also something that I noticed looking back at my sort of mental health journey was that when I first got a diagnosis, it was very stressful because for sort of two weirdly different reasons. One, if I have this, that I'm broken, that I've failed to be a human properly, which is like, I just want to go back and hug myself at that point. And then the other thing that was really like strange but powerfully difficult was, if this is a disorder, I have to fix it. And if I fix it, who am I even going to be? Because this is so much like a part of what I am, right? If you take away this anxiety, I am I even going to have a personality anymore? And so in a similar way to what we were talking about with creativity and making the understanding that the project isn't you, but you are in the project, it becomes this almost like it is a part of me, and recognizing too, it's not fixable. Like this is so much a way that my brain is organized. It is the way that I move through the world. It is always going to be with me, and it's a thing that I can address, that I can kind of like help with, but it's always going to be there. But it's also not me. It's not like the whole of myself. It's no
Mhm.
more me than the fact that my hair is this color is me.
Mhm.
And so part of that affinity cycle is that place where you get where you're like, I am this thing, I am only this thing, and so why wouldn't I be lost in it, because there's nothing else. And so that's largely what I was trying to replicate with that. And then in the world there are other people, so people who have a level of affinity that prevents them from sort of moving through their lives in a way that is safe, are sort of brought into the Imperial Archives to work with, like sort of like a magical Smithsonian. So they are around their affinity materials. They're also around workers generalists who are trained in both, like working on these artifacts and also kind of helping the specialists manage their affinity cycle, and so that they're not, falling down the slope, that they get kind of help recognizing when they need to step back. And there are all these sort of protocols. It's like half mental health group home, health, half magical Smithsonian.
Well, there's a you know, I had when I was reading Empire of Exiles, there were so many things when it came to the spiral thing that like I totally got. Also, having a generalized anxiety disorder and ADHD and stuff like that, and like I won't spoil scenes exactly for folks out there, but like there is a scene where there is a character that is hitting a spiral, and like reading those parts of that character, their thoughts, their how they were falling into this, and the spiraling thought that just kept leading them down and down and down. I got chills in a way that I haven't reading a book before, because I connected to that so hard. I'm like, I know this. I've been here.
Mhm.
But the thing that I wanted to talk about here was, in that scene you have people trying to help this character, and I really loved that, because it felt like things I had heard friends say. It had felt like things that my wife has tried to get me to think about, instead of the spiral
Mhm.
and everything like that. And that really did feel like that also came from a personal experience of
Mhm.
help, which is that was a side that because you had talked to me about this magic system, way back when, and I loved that idea, but I had never thought about the flip side of it, of the help. And you were just talking about like the mental health Smithsonian, which I now love as a title.
I want that. Yeah. I think that help piece is so crucial. And I really want people to understand that parts of us that can at times really sort of take over and be very difficult to deal with, like that anxiety spiral. Yes, they can't be fixed. They can be managed, and it's not even necessary to fix them. Like, from an evolutionary standpoint, the people who were more anxious often kept us safe because they were more vigilant.
Yep.
So there's a
Right.
reason we are how we are. And
Yeah.
we're all
Oh, you
expected
think
to.
there's weird side effects that are very helpful, right?
Yeah.
Like, you
Yes.
spot threats quick. I'm very good at pattern finding.
Oh yeah.
Probably
Yes.
like there's like probably too good at this point, but yeah, no, I think that's the thing. It's like, well, actually there's like a slight advantage.
Yes, it's just that we live in this world where we're sort of generically expected to behave the same, and we're supposed to function to the same levels. And I really worry about that, because I don't think that's remotely realistic, but it puts people who are not typical in some way, who have normalized that I'm supposed to be like this, and therefore if I'm not, I'm broken. It puts them in this really tough place. Like, there is nothing wrong with having long-term therapy. There is nothing
Right.
wrong with having someone safe to talk with, to manage, what is perceived as a disorder, to recognize the ways in which can be the advantage in your life, and to recognize the times where you need to manage it, and to have safe people in your life to help with that. So many people do have high anxiety or tremendous issues with other forms of mental health challenges, or depression. And we just need people in our life to be supportive, just as we will be supportive towards them. Someone who's dealing with anxiety can still be a tremendous supporter of others in their lives. They are not less than in any
Yeah.
way. So I feel like we don't talk enough about that piece. But I think that I hear you on connecting to that part of the character. I did as well. Something else that came up for me in reading it that I was curious about is that there are times when the character wants to engage with their affinity. And it seemed like it was twofold. There were times where they wanted to be able to engage with their affinity safely and stop having people tell them that they couldn't, which makes sense. And I think it partly comes from that place of, look, I just really want to be okay so much, and I want to
Tanook is a
ignore.
mood.
Yeah, Tanook is definitely a mood. But the desire to also be strong and be helpful and not feel
Yeah.
so at risk in oneself is definitely so true.
I feel like there's
Yeah.
some themes through the whole books, and one is that there's a lot of the characters needing to understand that while it's great to be useful, that does not determine you're valid. I know in the first book there's a point where Amadea and Eni have a conversation about how Eni really wants to be useful, but they're getting thick into this mystery, and it's very dangerous. And she's like, I don't need you to be useful, I just need you to be safe. And at the same time, if one steps back, you could say, Amadea, this is also the thing someone needs to say to you. And on top of that too, I think this is a book that is very much about empathy. And so even Amadea is one of the main characters, and I think she's a really good example of this, because not only she's like the archivist superior, she's like the manager of the mental health Smithsonian. And she's very good at her job. She's very good at helping these people through their crises. But at the same time, she's not dealing with her own stuff because it's not as big a deal. It's not as bad. And so there are places where they will turn to her and be like, I'm going to do this back for you because you're not taking care of yourself. And she's not got like some special power that's related to it. She is just a person who has been through a lot of stuff and not really processed it as well as can be, and probably already had some anxiety disorder stuff. And so that piece of like, everybody's going through their own thing, and is there space you can help them through that, and not, it's not like, well, we have to give all the people with the magic powers special help. It's like everybody needs a little help, and that's okay, right? That is part of being a person in a community.
Yes, and I think it's actually really common for people, particularly if Amadea considers herself, it seems, to be someone who is the solver of problems. She talks about herself in those terms a great deal. I think that's a strength that she leans into, and therefore one of the challenges is how to allow people to support her. And, you clearly get the sense that because of the traumatic experiences she had in her childhood, that even though there were witnesses and one of them ends up being a close friend, the reality is that she was very alone in that experience, that what was happening to her and others couldn't intervene. And so that experience of being this alone kind of informs for people who have the experience of that in childhood. It informs their own sense of no one can help me, or I'm going to minimize my problems because they're in the past, even if I haven't processed them. Sorry, they're still with you. So, and we do see this, and how also traumatic experience is connected to mental health issues like anxiety and depression, and challenges, in fact, staying regulated or being able to kind of express your stuff to others. If you haven't processed it for yourself, you're not going to be able to talk about it very easily to other people. So, and I just think the way you bring that into being in the story, while still keeping us so engaged in the story, is wonderful. It's this brilliant example of, show, don't tell that you continually do throughout the books. Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
We got to start wrapping things up because somehow 50 minutes have already passed.
Oh.
Erin, thank you so much for taking time today to talk with us and sharing all of this. Like, thank you. I really do appreciate it.
Thank you. It was a lot of fun. Thanks for having me.
Yeah.
It's a delight having you. Thank you for being here and making the time for us. Yeah.
If people wanted to find you and what you do on the interwebs, where could they do so?
You can find me on Twitter and Blue Sky at Erin M. Evans. You can follow me on Instagram at all the Erinies, but I am most frequently on the Dungeon Scrawlers / Writing About Dragons and Shit Discord, which has a link in our in the podcast description. Yeah, you can listen to me on Writing About Dragons and Shit with Trevor here, and B. Dave Walters. And you can join me for concentration check if you want to get some writing done on twitch.tv/dungeon scrawlers every Monday at 1:30 p.m. Pacific. If you are in Seattle tomorrow night, I will be doing a reading with Django Wexler at Third Place Books at the Lake Forest Park location at 7 p.m. So I hope I see you there.
Mitra, same question.
Well, you can find me on the site, like Erin said, that rhymes with bitter and also critter and fritter too, for that matter, at Mitra Jordan. And you can find me at mitrajordan.com. And yeah, I'm around, but not as around as many people.
You can find me on socials at the Trevor. There's an A hiding in there, but also I do highly recommend going to pick up the books of Usurper in bookstores now. Empire of Exiles and Relics of Ruin. As you can see, they have some really big ties to this show as it is, with talking about mental health in a way that you might not expect. So yeah, go pick those up. They're a good time. But once again, Erin, thank you so much for joining us. That's going to do it for this week's episode. I have to remember that I have to click the button because I don't have that little Stream Deck thing anymore. So you all have a great rest of your day. And until next time, take care of yourself.
Take care, everyone.
Champions of Psychology is meant as education and entertainment. It is not a substitute for medical advice or professional counseling. Discussion of mental health topics will be primarily rooted in research and the personal experiences and self-disclosures of the hosts. While we can provide generalized education and possible mental health resources, we cannot offer any recommendations, advice, or opinions for any specific persons, cases, or situations. We provide these resources and links at our sole discretion, but have not necessarily vetted or reviewed any resource. We assume no liability for the use of the information or resources on these sites, and we encourage you to use your own best judgment.